What if there were financial solutions being created by brave and brilliant women, a feminist economic model? A new organization of women is realizing that woman-centered model, lifting up women activists and their real-world solutions for building an economy of our own.
90 years ago, in a famous essay, Virginia Woolf advised a young woman writer that she needed two things, an income and a room of her own. After decades of a pay gap and big money's corruption, we need more than that today. We're creating an economy of our own.
An economy of our own is creating awareness of how rigged the current economy is and how many inspiring solutions are rising because of the work of brilliant women activists.
Women have been cheated and exploited by a mean economy for so long. But that's why we're in the best position to fix it together. And we're starting right now.
The people who have been most excluded by that system are the ones that have the deepest understanding of what has to be transformed. It is from that knowledge that it's very important for them to lead. That is leadership we absolutely have to have.
Screwnomics is my word for the widely applied economic theory, I guess, that women should always work for less, or even better, for free. Together, we can create a living economic ecology. But to do that, we're going to need to make economics far more sexy than it is today. There are feminist economic solutions, real world fixes that are working in communities right now, communities like yours.
An economy of our own is all about creating the space to lift up solutions women are advancing. We're here to celebrate women's way of knowing about money, bring you the work they're doing to shake up the system, and compile critical resources for activists like you who want to bring these kinds of changes into your own communities. Put your head together with us. It's the way we create real solutions, talking together about building an economy that works for all of us. We want an economy of our own. We want it now. And if you do too, join us today at aneconomyofourOwn.org.
Hello and welcome to a Zoom of our own. We are so glad that you're joining us tonight for this webinar. I am Elaine Ball and I will be our Zoom host this evening. And I wanted to go over just a couple of points about our Zoom format. So many of us are familiar with the Zoom meeting. This tonight is a webinar. So you won't be able to, if you're an attendee watching, you won't be able to see other people's videos or speak aloud, but you will be able to use the chat. And we would like to invite you now to share in the chat where you're joining us from. And you will also be able to see and hear our panelists for tonight's discussion. We would like to start with a poll. So as you are reading and posting in the chat where you're joining us from, I will share a poll with everyone to start us off.
Yeah, actually, you did now that you say that.
So you may be able to see the lottery poll, what you would do if you won a lottery for $100,000, and you can view other people's responses in real time as well. while we're finishing that up, would you like to start us off, Ricky?
I'm sorry. Now can you hear me? All right, good. Are we going to be able to see the results of the poll? Yes, you're going to post them, put them up on the screen in a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll share the results once it ends.
Okay. All right, good. Yes, I just want to welcome everyone. I'm Ricky Diamond. You saw me in the video earlier, and I am so happy to have this conversation about a really a substance that is so ever present that it's easy not to think about it. You know, it just is, right? It's like we're fish in water. We're workers living in the world of money, right? And tonight we're going to actually talk about what money is and how we make it, how we can use it, and why it doesn't seem to be working so very well for a great many Americans and people of the world. So we've got some wonderful panelists tonight, and I'm just thrilled that we have them all here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a little bit, but just to let you know, we established that we're from all over the country. We're from Ellen Brown is from Los Angeles. Mary Sanderson is from Wisconsin. Ebony Perkins is from North Carolina. And I'm from Vermont, so we've pretty much got the place represented a little bit anyway. Adrian Masanari, who was scheduled to come and join us, who is an expert on the Reddit GameStop phenomenon that we'll be talking about tonight, had a last-minute emergency and won't be joining us, but we love her work, and so we'll be sharing some of that as we have our conversation. What are people doing here? The poll results. Paying off loans is important. Buying a house, saving it in the bank is the big one. Wow. And not that many people buying smartphones and getting a trading app. That's interesting. Gee, I wonder why. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. We always like to thank you for your answers, people. It's very interesting to know who's in the conversation here. Yeah. So yeah, let's start with our slides, Elaine, with the assumptions, and we like to make sure we're all on the same page. So these are our assumptions at the base of our conversation. Money talks in a male voice. Still, I'm sorry, our financial systems and rules and tools were not invented by women and generally omitted, misnamed, and discounted what women do. Slavery ended 156 years ago. I think that's still right, but systemic racial exploitation surely remains. And I know you're all paying attention to the trial that's happening in Wisconsin this started today. Women have always worked, but only in the past 50 years have the majority of women and young mothers entered the modern job market. Women and people of color are now business owners and financial managers. We've arrived, and yet our caring remains discounted, doesn't it? And that word oikonomia, or which is the Greek for economics, they were the ones who coined the word, literally means household management. So we know that women can change an economy that is now waged as war, but could be more wisely waging life. How exactly is in the details. Growing inequality and environmental ruin tell us we can't afford more alpha male only business as usual. That's for sure. Now let's look at the assumptions. No, I'm sorry, those were the assumptions. Now let's look at the intention. We want to grow your economic confidence in your life, wage, and value. There's a lot in this economy that it wants to tell you that you don't know that much. But we trust each woman's identity is shaped and strengthened by discovery of her own economic truth. And that's true for men too. We honor all stages in women's ways of knowing, which is a well-known book about how we know what we know. We go through these stages, they said, and this is true because the economy is so complicated. You may go through these stages numerous times. You might know everything in the world about municipal bonds and not know a thing about tax policy. So we begin with silence. We're quiet and we're seen but not heard, and we might feel kind of dumb. Received knowledge is when we listen to voices of others in authority. Subjective knowledge is when we begin to listen to our own inner voice and we're protecting it. We're still a little fearful. We might be a little defensive. Then we move on to procedural knowledge and are able to separate and connect different ways of knowing, interested in not only what other people think, but how their perspectives were formed exactly. We're going to ask questions and we're going to find some truths more reliable and logical than others. And then we move on to constructed knowledge and recognize that all knowledge is built and is continually being built, not born. We trust our ability to pursue knowledge by listening to diverse voices, considering context, and collaborating while communicating our thoughts and our questions. And we can hold and remodel our ideas with passion and with pleasure. I think that's so important. So that's where we start from. And I hope you're perfectly comfortable being at whatever stage you are at in this whole world of money. I kind of flip around in a few different stages on the subject of money. I want to just introduce the subject a little bit by saying that everything is digital these days. This meeting is digital. It's a good example of what's going on, but it's really happening in the financial world. We've got internet banking, we've got smartphone fintech, we've got apps for your phone for budgeting and financing and investing. We have curiosity about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and most recently in the news has been this Robinhood phenomenon for retail investors, which is a word for people like you and me. We're not Wall Street traders, we're retail investors if we decide to trade in the market. And there's been a social media scandal called hashtag GameStop. I don't know if you've been paying attention to it, but we'll be talking about it a little bit. It was led by somebody called Roaring Kitty on Reddit, supposedly beating out Wall Street experts using the Robinhood app, which makes it a very, you see it advertised a great deal these days. In reality, Roaring Kitty was a licensed broker who really knew the business a great deal and was posing as a Reddit bro. And a lot of Robinhooders lost money. And Citadel, a huge hedge fund, really created that market and made a great deal of money in creating that market. One young student actually committed suicide because he had lost over nearly $500 million and didn't see his way out of it. So it's kind of tragic. And in a lot of ways, this was a classic, what they call an asset bubble, which was overvaluing GameStop's stores, their bricks and mortar, the real value on the street. And the awful thing is that Wall Street really knew that value, that low value, all along. In fact, they made most of the money they made by shorting the stock, which is a way of betting on their losing. And sure enough, they did lose. And Citadel won, and a lot of other big hedge funds. So one of the things that you may not have noticed, but some people paid attention to, was that the stakeholders in the gaming world, in the trading world on Reddit, and the trading world on Wall Street, all three of those realms are what Adrian Massaneri called dude-centric, D-U-D-E hyphen centric, because there's a very particular culture there that we'll be talking about a little bit. So with that introduction of framing the conversation, I'm going to ask people to, oh no, that's right. I'm going to share, I'd forgotten this ad that is sort of dude-centric, yes.
Look at them, the sheep, letting robots manage their money. That's not you. You're not passive. You know where your safe investments are, but what about when you want to really go for it? Penny stocks, crypto. You don't f around with that shit. You've done the research, you follow the news, you know which companies you like, which you hate. You trade options. Of course you're ready. You were born ready. And with Gatsby, it's so easy, you can do it from anywhere.
Yes, that says it. You too can get rich easily. So that is the pitch in the ad, and that was a what you call a retail investor. So there's much that can be said about that. So, but we'll get back to that. But let's just introduce. Have people introduce themselves and tell us the story of how they got into this world of this dude-centric world of money. Ebony, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Ricky, and hi, everyone. I am Ebony Perkins, and I am the Director of Investor Relations at Self-Help Credit Union. Self-Help is one of the largest community development financial institutions in the country. We specifically exist to serve communities that have been underserved and overlooked, I like to say underestimated, including women, to provide loans so that they can support their families. I have come into this work specifically, well, I can take a step back. I come from a very long line of strong women in my family, from my mother to both of my grandmothers. And I've been very fortunate in that. In particular, I had a grandmother who passed almost 7 years ago, and we were always super, super close. And what was really interesting, I wasn't expecting anything from her when she died. Like, for me, my life, my gift was her life and in our relationship. And we came back home from the funeral. My grandfather went into a safe and he said, Ebony, your grandmother has been saving all of this for you here. And he had, it's the weirdest thing, he gave me a bag full of cash. He said, over the years, Granny has, like, every few days or every week or so, she would take a $10 or a $20 bill and she would just put it away. And she would put it away all for you, because she wanted to make sure that you understood the importance of being able to take care of yourself and to be able to provide for your family. Mm-hmm. And so with that, it was a huge learning opportunity. It was a huge moment for me. I always cared about money and I cared about business and public service, But for me, it was important because my grandmother sent a very clear message that in order to take care of myself, I had to be able to provide for myself and to provide for my families. And she wanted to make sure that I knew that. So message received.
Wonderful, wonderful story. Oh, Helen, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Ellen Brown. I'm chairman of the Public Banking Institute, and I've written 13 books. 3 of them are on banking, banking and finance. I was a lawyer as, my paying job when I used to actually have a job was as a lawyer. And then my ex-husband wanted to go in the Foreign Service. So we went abroad for 11 years and lived in Central America and Africa. And then I got divorced and wrote Web of Debt, which was the first book I wrote on banking. I knew that, or I had always been interested in the fact that banks, not governments, actually create our money. But other people had said that, and I didn't really know what I could say about it. But I learned that The Wizard of Oz was written as a monetary allegory in the 1890s. So that Web of Debt was woven around that. It was a populist movement. And that book generated a fair amount of interest. And then in the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, I started writing articles, and I knew that North Dakota was the only state that had its own bank. So I was watching it, and it was the only state that actually escaped the credit crisis. It never went in the red. It had the lowest unemployment rate, the lowest default rate, the lowest foreclosure rate, et cetera. So I got so I started writing articles on that. And then I got a lot of more email than I could handle. So we started a Google group, and all these heavy hitters came from different countries, the old money reformers, the social creditors from Australia and New Zealand and the UK and Canada. So we really got an education in this whole history of money and the populist movements and attempts to change the money system for the better. And then there was the crash and Occupy Wall Street, and I was invited to speak there here in LA. And we decided that we'd done enough talking. It was time to do something. So we formed the Public Banking Institute, and that was we all just got together in somebody's living room. And other people wanted these heavy hitters for board members, but I was afraid we would throw a party and nobody would come. And so I said, well, what if we just be the board members? So we all were, we picked out 5 of us, just formed a board. And, we had one person who was very good at website, and, people did different things. And over the so that was in 2011, early 2011. And since then, we've had over 50 bills for public banks in different states. Right now, just this year, we've had 16 new bills filed just this year. There were 3 bills filed at the federal level last year that are quite promising. And I'll just mention about my grandmothers, who were somewhat of a motivating factor. My one grandmother had 10 kids and was a farmer's wife. And, that's all she ever did in her life, of course, obviously, was raise kids. And my other grandmother had 7 kids and died during the Great Depression. My mother doesn't like me to tell this, but she died trying to self-abort because they had no money, and my, grandfather was out of work, and they had all these kids to feed. They couldn't afford to feed anymore. So she was 42 when she died, and I was named after her. So, I always feel like they're probably hovering over and saying, you can't let that happen again. You've got to fix that situation. And I always feel so sort of liberated compared to even my mother, but particularly my grandmother's, where we have so much opportunity now. First of all, we don't have to be strapped to raising 10 kids. I clearly come from a fertile family. I could have easily had 10 kids myself. I think I had 2 kids and I have 1 grandchild. Unfortunately, they're in other countries, so I can't see them now. But anyway, I do think we've really been liberated. I mean, this century is very promising for women because we can do things that women never could do before. But I'll stop there.
That's wonderful. Oh, Mary.
Well, first, thank you. Let me say it's a great pleasure to participate in Ricky's work to bring women and money together. And following Ellen is hard. I've only been really paying attention for a couple of years. After long decades of looking away from money as much as possible because it's kind of ugly and hidden, suddenly the money creation question caught my attention and reignited my pleasure in study. It addressed something that had had me discouraged for a long time, which is why people of color, and especially women, must always be competing and begging for money just to do our caring work. That question is nested inside a bigger one. Is it our human fate to kill each other in our habitat forever over money? So, well, yesterday my husband and grandson were playing Mario Brothers. Grandpa was the ghost and Luigi got him every time, but they both were laughing until Grandpa took off his blanket and said, "You always win because you have all the weapons and keep changing the rules." Oh, just when I needed a lighthearted illustration about bank credit and money system. But I was primed for money study though from my early family history too. When I was just a little kid, my dad would get worked up telling me about the GD greedy Rockefellers and the Council on Foreign Relations while he'd be lying on his back in the dirt, bolting new blades onto the disc. Nobody but my dad talked that way. My mom wouldn't even talk to him about it at all. We just rolled our eyes, all of us. When I later learned that the bank had foreclosed on his family home, threatening his family home when he was just 10, at the height of the Depression, I then understood better how he was extra sensitive to the power of bank credit and really spent his life studying it. And it made me wonder about the money roots of my own and other people's problems. Well, in 2012, after kind of a long time of kind of fruitless wheel spinning with peace and justice work, our Madison branch petitioned hard, and we won a referendum to clarify in the Constitution that money is not speech and corporations are not persons. And at that time, the power of money over our government and over our lives was becoming clearer for me. And this brought into high relief my own previous unconscious acceptance that women don't have money. Well, then I met Ellen and other reformers at democracy conventions. A key puzzle piece fell into place when I learned that the money we use every day is created and extinguished by bank lending. Commercial banks, I was amazed to find out, not only collect interest on every dollar that passes through my hands, they are the deciders about who can borrow how much new bank credit based on one intention, which is to build their own power. So there's a picture in my head of old guys playing that schoolyard game, King on the Mountain, with stock options and short sales as their swords. And I'm thinking now how we have nuclear weapons and climate change on the horizon. We need to really outgrow those old European customs of bank credit and conquest. We need permanent, stable value, just money controlled by a truly representative government.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you can see why we've brought these women together to talk about this subject. I have to tell you that when I first heard, I was at a conference here in Vermont, and a gentleman named Bernard Leader, who is no longer with us, but helped to create the euro currency, was here in Vermont and said what you just said, Mary, that money was created out of bank credit, that it was created out of debt. And I said, what? Why? I went to the mint when I was in high school, and I saw, in the Secretary of Treasury is signing the bills, and I'm going to fact check that because I'm a journalist, and I fact checked it and discovered that, whoa, it was true. But nobody had ever explained that to me before. And so I've been boggled by it ever since, too. Well, I wonder, we saw the ad for the new dream that we're being presented by Wall Street, that you too can get rich easily if you just are smart enough to and brave enough to trade on Wall Street with the big boys. And so I wonder if we could start our conversation by asking Ebony to who works with investors, who isn't as far as I know, doing this as she's talking to us, trading. No, you're not doing that. Okay. So maybe you could share with us some really satisfying projects that you can that make you feel good for doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think there are multiple reasons why I'm at self-help. I really love to see direct impact. Like there's a lot of, what people call greenwashing that happens in the impact investing industry. But I like to see the direct results of somebody placing, a deposit at self-help. So like opening a certificate of deposit or a money market account and being able to show them a picture of a family that their cash investment really helped. So prime example, about a year or two ago, we provided a loan to a woman who lived in rural North Carolina. I believe she was in her mid to late 50s. She had never owned a home on her own. She lived in public housing in rural North Carolina. And she ended up going to an event that her church hosted. And at that event, she met one of our branch managers who was presenting about financial literacy and how you don't always have to be a renter and that you can own your own home. And so she connected with our branch and she decided that she wanted to take the steps to begin to buy her first home. And she worked with our underwriters and our loan officers, and we eventually got her to a point where she bought her first home. And we have a whole video about this lady where she's talking about it. And she now feels like, oh, she has ownership. She can pass something on to her family. And I believe the favorite part of her story for me was when she looked in the camera and she said, because this was taken like around October and November, she said, I'm in my home now. And guess what? We are going to have Christmas at this house. I've never had a Christmas tree, and we are going to have a Christmas tree in that corner right there, and we're opening presents at my house on Christmas Eve. And I said, you know what? There is some ownership to that. There's a pride, a point of pride. And really what I recognize about money, a lot of times people associate money with value, but money is a tool. And money allows you the opportunity to really acquire and get what's important in life. And in that moment, being with her family on Christmas Eve is what's important. It's much, much more important than money. And because of investors, so people who just wanted to open an account at self-help, like a regular CD or a money market account, because of investments in our products, we were able to provide a loan for this person so that she can spend time with her family on her terms. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of the work that we're doing at Self-Help. We even have a specialty CD that we call our Women and Children CD that goes to support women and children, women-headed households, women-owned businesses, early childhood education, because we really want to provide the tool in order for people to be able to enjoy their individual lives. So that's an example of the type of work that we're doing. I really love to see the smile on people's faces. I love to see people getting their power back, because really that's what we're shooting for. We're shooting for the ability to have and claim our own power within our own lives. So yeah.
Yeah. So you have certificates of deposit that are identified for specific purposes.
Exactly. Yeah, we have a women and children CD that supports women-headed households, women-owned businesses, early childhood education. We also have a green CD that supports our environmental lending. And then we also recently started what we call our community recovery CD. And so a lot of families that we serve have been impacted by COVID and the economic downturn, as well as the results of the George Floyd murder. And so we have products that go and support a lot of our lending in order to help these families.
Remarkable. Well, I don't see an easy segue here, but you're talking about your community. You're talking about folks in North Carolina and people that you can see, and that it's not just numbers and fast-moving numbers on a chart somewhere, which is what you see when you're looking at Robinhood, or you're looking at your Wall Street trading platforms. So I wonder if I could ask Ellen how you see Wall Street. Well, actually, maybe I should ask Ebony this too. Maybe the both of you could answer. How do you see Wall Street affecting the work that you do?
Okay, so there are multiple angles, and Ellen, let me know if you want to address this first. But there are multiple angles as to how Wall Street affects our work. We notice. One, we noticed that people, depending on their age, they may not automatically think about investing in a bank. So like a lot of people don't automatically assume that they should place a bulk of their money in a bank for safety reasons. They automatically go to Wall Street. So like a lot of the folks who were new to trading and they wanted to invest in GameStop, which is not a good idea, despite the returns people got. Many of those folks, they weren't thinking about security, and they wanted higher returns, and it hurt them. And I don't think it's always safe, especially if people are not aware and they are not informed of the game that they're playing. A lot of people, they are in it for the long run as opposed to just short-term returns. And I think that is something that we really have to remember, that this is a professional game. It's a professional game that people are overlooking. Wall Street also affects my day-to-day too, if I'm honest, because in times of economic distress, our work increases. So for instance, when COVID happened last year, a lot of people were out of work. Our work tripled because the communities that we serve, they were hurting more and more. And so we had to make sure that we were still here, we were still strong, and we were still solid to make sure that the effects that the Wall Street gamers are doing, we needed to make sure that they weren't hurting everyday people in their everyday lives. Does that answer your question?
Ellen, what do you see with Wall Street? I mean, you wrote a wonderful piece that's in our curriculum about your view of Reddit, the Reddit revolution as part of the populist movement dating back to the Bank of North Dakota, which I thought was a really interesting insight in the way you brought that whole long history into it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and I'll just remark on what Ebony said about credit, to buy a house. That goes back to our original, what's been called the American system versus the British system of banking. Benjamin Franklin said, that if people had credit to do something productive, that's the whole idea of credit. I mean, you think about banks creating money as credit on their books, and you think, well, that's terrible. That's, obviously we're being taken advantage of because they didn't really have the money and they're just advancing credit. But if the people own the bank, it is a good thing because you couldn't buy a $100,000 or 200 or 500, whatever, $1,000 house just by saving. I mean, by the time you had saved up the money, you would be old and you wouldn't get to have Christmas with your kids. At best, it would have been Christmas with your grandkids or great grandkids or something. So that's what our current banking system is all about. It's about, ideally, these loans are made either for something productive, like a business that's going to produce and pay back. And I mean, these are called self-funding loans or self-liquidating loans, or this is how Roosevelt's government rebuilt the country in the Great Depression, where they used a public bank. It wasn't really a bank, it was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. But what they did was just mobilize credit. And so anything that could pay back, they funded, like dams that would generate electricity, or trains that would generate fees, or farms that would generate produce or whatever. So as long as these loans are productive, that's a good thing. But of course, what the system we have right now, unfortunately, we started out with mom and pop capitalism, where you could go out into the wilderness and stake out your own plot of land and work it and be independent. So every household could be a farm or a small business or whatever, and they competed fairly with each other. But now what we have is, then we went to industrial capitalism, which was still a good thing. I mean, you had like the big, like my father's family, they were car people from Detroit. You had the big car manufacturers, or what, you have all the big manufacturers and people work for them, and that was okay. But now what we have is finance capitalism, where the big corporations and the big banks get all the perks. They can borrow virtually for free from the Federal Reserve. And of course, the Treasury keeps pumping out money, but it's the Federal Reserve that buys these bonds, the debt, and then they have all this extra liquidity that sits on the books of banks. And then right now, banks can borrow at 0.25%, like almost for free from the Federal Reserve. And they're still lending at 20% or roughly, or more on credit cards. So they haven't been required to change their practices with lending, although they are getting very good benefits. And then obviously the rich get richer, where if you can borrow very cheaply, you can buy up all the small businesses, which is what's happening now with all these businesses that have been shut down. Then the small businesses are gobbled up by the big, or the small landowners are gobbled up, or the houses once again are being gobbled up, and then they're turned into rentals. So people that thought they owned their own home wind up renting at even higher prices. But one good thing that did, good result, it seemed to me, of the shutdowns is that people are waking up. I mean, people now, well, even though they got taken advantage of, these young kids have time to study up on the market. They have time to communicate with each other. And they did show that the 99%, if we get together and if we communicate and work together, we can beat the 1%. I mean, we've got the numbers. They've got the money, but we've got the numbers. And clearly, we're not going to win this whole game unless we can get together and devise a system that works for everyone and get everyone behind it. Because the only thing we have is the numbers. I mean, we have theoretically the voting power, but we've seen that our votes are, I mean, it's obviously the big multi-billionaires that can call the shots in Congress. It's not, our Congress people don't necessarily represent what we, or our local interests anyway. So, but it seems to me there is hope. First of all, that the young people had time to get educated, and they got a little bit of money with their stimulus money, so they could start tinkering. I mean, I've done, ever since I got divorced 20 years ago, I've been in the stock market with my half of the community property, and I lost a ton of money to start with because I didn't know what I was doing. And it, just like everybody, I fell for these those newsletters or whatever, but you do learn. And I mean, I'm not recommending that anybody get in the stock market, but you can see why that happened, because what else could you do in the last year? Where else could you really make money if you're out of work? So you can see why that's enticing to people.
Sure, of course, yeah. And invest. I mean, a lot of people. Well, not a lot of people, but if you're lucky, you have some money in stocks through a mutual fund or a pension plan or something like that. So it's not as if it's not as if the stock market is of no use whatsoever. I wouldn't want to suggest that. I think sharing in ownership is a great idea if we could do it more cooperatively. And as you say, if we could do it in a united way with a goal, a different goal, not the king of the mountain goal that Mary was talking about, but a goal for our communities and our health as a nation.
Yeah, and I'll just add on the history that you asked about. So in the 1890s, there was a populist leader, 1890, a woman, Mary Elizabeth Lease, or Mary Ellen Lease, I've seen her name both ways. But anyway, she was supposedly the prototype for Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. But she gave a speech in 1890 where she said, Wall Street, I'll just read it. Wall Street owns the country. It is no longer a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but a government of Wall Street, by Wall Street, and for Wall Street. The great common people of this country are slaves, and monopoly is the master. So that was more than 100 years ago, and we're still there. The populist leader, so then we had the populist movement, and the first ever march on Washington was supposedly the prototype for the plot line of The Wizard of Oz, where you have these, not even people, but beings marching on Oz and seeking redress for their problems and getting turned away. And the same thing happened to the populists. And then we went, then we got the Federal Reserve instead of what William Jennings Bryan was really trying for, which was money issued by the people, like Lincoln did, where Lincoln issued. The American colonists, of course, basically beat the British by issuing their own money. And then Lincoln again beat the British bankers who were threatening to, or would have lent to him at 30% interest. And he got around that by issuing his own money again, going back to the greenbacks, going back to what the American colonists had done. So that's considered the American system, where we don't need to borrow from someone else. We can generate our own credit, and we've got our own resources. Of course, 100 or 200 years ago, we had land. Land was, you could go out and homestead your land. My great whatever grandfather in Pennsylvania homesteaded, I forget which you could get, 260 acres, something like that. And that was the farm that my mother grew up on. But you can't do that anymore. We don't have land, and it's clearly there's this push to commodify everything. I mean, now they're trying to sell all these things that should belong to the people. They're trying to sell off the water and sell off the land, obviously. And of course, Bill Gates is now the largest agricultural land owner in the country. And so we've got these 4 people, I guess, who have close to $100 billion or have $100 billion. I mean, what could you do with $100 billion? You could buy everything. You could buy politicians, you can buy universities, you could buy drug companies, you could buy whatever, you can manipulate the system. So it's no longer a democracy. As long as we have oligarchs, people with money who pass it on to their kids, that we do, it's going to be very difficult to break through that. And yet, I think we will. I don't know why. It's just just a thing that's kind of intuition or something. It just seems to me we came for this. And, and then of course, I love to read all this spiritual stuff that says, the energies are changing, and I don't want to go into that.
No, I think maybe women's beginning to, you were talking about all the great changes that have happened for women in this century, well, in the last century, a great deal has changed. Actually, I wanted to read something that from Adrian Masanari. I said I would, Mary, I'm going to cut in on you. I was going to call on you, but I'm going to interject this because of what Ellen was just talking about. This is from an article that Adrian was featured in the Lily, written by Carolyn Kitchener. And I think it's fascinating that she's also focused on this whole subject. She says, personal finance, especially stocks and investments, can be an intimidating subject for a lot of people, but especially for women. Until relatively recently, women were entirely shut out of financial discussions. Their father handled the money, and then their husband handled the money. And married women were not legally allowed to hold a credit card in their own name until the mid-1970s. Single women also struggled to get their own line of credit. And this, not just credit cards, but bank accounts too. I feel like it's just so ingrained for women. Oh, investing, that's boy talk. That's not for us, a young woman named Chloe Stevens said. She was determined to break into the boys club and do that investing thing. So when she searched for investment advice, she said Reddit's Wall Street Bets kept coming up, surfacing with its avatar of a white man in a suit with slick back hair and sunglasses. Right away, Stephen struggled to understand the dense financial language and acronyms. So many acronyms, she said. She avoided asking questions, worried that commenters would make fun of her for being too stupid to understand. And this is when Adrian Masanari says, as a woman on Reddit Wall Street Bets, you have to be willing to put up with a lot of racist and misogynistic stuff. That's just part of that culture, kind of a man-to-man culture, and all playing that king of the mountain game. And if you were girly about it, if you were soft, if you had feelings, good Lord, if you cried, that would just make you one of us. That would make you a girl. So,
can I respond to that?
Yes.
I, as a woman who, a few years ago, I took a course at Duke, and it was all about financial planning. And my plan and my goal is to sit for the CFP exam to become a certified financial planner. The reason I bring that up is because I think, based on what you just read, part of the reason, this is my personal experience, a lot of the reason why women feel intimidated with investments and finance in general is because of the lingo. And because of, I often say that there is a language barrier. There's an assumption that everybody in the room knows so much more than you do. You're the dumbest one. You don't want to bring it up because, like you said, you may come across as if you're stupid and you're less informed. And that's the last thing you want to do. You feel like you're carrying the weight of all women on your shoulders. The secret that I learned, and it took me a long time to get to this because I felt the same way for so long. And then I realized they don't know what they're talking about either. They have no idea. And they throw words around like it's nothing. And they use it like in the wrong context. They really have no idea. And I remember there's a saying, I think by Albert Einstein, where like, if you can't explain it to a kindergartner where they can understand, you don't understand it yourself. And a lot of times men are playing that game as well. They will never admit it, but they are playing the same game. And I think that women, we should not feel intimidated or uncomfortable in that space. They are lying to us, and we should know this. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
That's it? Mary, how are you going to follow that one? You are a proponent of public banking. We both are on the Women, Money, and Democracy Committee at the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. So I know that about you, but you think that doesn't quite go far enough, and that's why you're on the board of the Alliance for Just Money. Can you talk about that a little bit? What's the difference between public banking and what your organization is considering?
Well, first let me follow up Ebony with gratitude. That's some hot advice you gave us. Just ignore them when they start talking smart. And I wanted to thank Ellen too for a lot of the things you brought in, like about the monopoly being known for over 100 years and whatnot. And I'm actually doing a reading group on the web of debt. We started in January and we're only 2/3 of the way through because there's so much there. We're getting a lot out of it and enjoying it. Ricky said you were going to ask me the question about, well, what is the problem? So that's kind of the one I'm prepared for, but I like your question too of what's the difference between public banking and the just money that the Alliance for Just Money works for. And public banking, as I'm not going to say much about it here, right here with Ellen present, she gets to talk about public banking, but it's regional and statewide, and where you kind of know the people and you have to organize with real people and everything. Just Money proposes that while public banking is great and we really do love it, and I love my wealth friends who are working hard for it, Just Money recognizes the need for a national and international solution. We see that as long as the bankers are still in this system where they can create virtually all the money as credit that they need, and they get to decide who gets it, so that it's always going to be working for them. We think that public banking won't be enough. I'll just read you the short thing that I wrote to answer your question of what's the problem. And I wanted to say that I think the problem is the private control of our money creation system. The fact that all we use for money is created and then destroyed and lent again. And this compounding interest forces us all into ruthless competition. It affects us emotionally and psychologically. It affects every area of our life. It drives the growth imperative that's killing our habitat, and it systematically concentrates wealth and power to that little group of people who are already the wealthy and powerful, like Ellen mentioned, the oligarchs, the small number of people who, it isn't just that they're rich, they control everything. Well, for us, another problem is the lending mechanism itself. The fact that it's private, I think we all agree on, that's a big problem. But the lending mechanism itself has scarcity and instability as standout features of the system that we know. And we don't think we're going to get rid of the scarcity and instability until there's a much larger fix than regional or state. We should remember this is the same lending mechanism that actually developed to finance the slave trade and European colonization of the world, and to finance all the deadlier and deadlier weapons we have, all because banks can speculatively create credit. Of course, it did also give us the Mona Lisa and central heating, which I really appreciate. Other things, good things came out of credit creation, as Ellen says. But it works to aid the ruthless, childish domination schemes of the lenders. And the amount of debt out there is so out of whack with the actual resources that the system practically forces bankers to finance speculators and completely secretive, unregulated hedge funds to the tune of billions of dollars per day, while a few million patient lending for decent housing can't be found. Those pictures we see of Central African Republic teenagers digging for niobium at gunpoint, do you ever wonder how those private armies get financed? They can't be funded legally or transparently. I'm thinking money lent to secretive hedge funds. And Who's making money on the rest of that murky supply chain from the Central African Republic mud mines to my new cell phone? I think we just have a hard time imagining the scale of the bank credit mess, like how big and powerful it is. It's like the Death Star out there or something. And we're busy thinking about, paying the rent. So yeah, I think it's hard to imagine, but we've got to remember that mining at gunpoint and regional wars are making money for those bankers every day. So the problem is that bank credit money channels our human energies toward further misery. If we humans want to have true self-government and to outgrow the stupidity of war someday, I think we need a permanent, stable value medium of exchange now, nationally and internationally. Like, as Ellen mentioned, the greenbacks, like the Pennsylvania script, things that historically have been shown to work. This is not somebody making up a good idea. This is historically shown to work. And it needs to be administered by representative government. Yes, and it needs to money has to have an intention to serve the commons, not the system. That's what the Alliance for Just Money is going for. That's how we see the problem. Thank you.
That was,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
So it seems to me, of course, this whole lockdown and is a disaster economically. But one advantage is that people have time to sit home and study these things. Whereas when it used to be that you worked 8 to 5 or whatever and came home and did the laundry and fed the kids and took them to the school in the morning. I mean, your whole life was caught up in working for somebody else's project that wasn't your own. And now, I mean, people are struggling, of course, and we wouldn't want to do this intentionally, but one advantage of it is, I myself am trapped in front of my computer. I'm tired of my computer, but there's so much out there. I mean, even ever since the computer came around, I used to be a library freak and, I'd go live in the library and I'd haul these great big books home and they wouldn't have what I wanted in them, or, it would refer to something else that I couldn't get. And now you can there's so much you can learn in so much shorter of a time than ever before. Or if you even think of like Abraham Lincoln, with his few books that they had, the classics, which was good. They were actually very educated in the 19th century. I mean, they wrote very well and all this because they studied those classics over and over. But today, there's just so much we can learn. And the potential for getting together on the internet is great. I mean, we never could have done that before. I do miss conferences. It was great going to, I got to meet people and hug people and, could go to dinner afterwards and all those fun things that go along with socializing. But we've never had this kind of, there's potential here that we can use. And I think the only way we're going to win this game is educate to lift awareness of what's going on and how we've been enslaved and what we need to do in order to change the system. And I mean, I'm not going to be I did run for office once, but I'm not going to do it again. I mean, I'm too old. But, to motivate some people who understand what needs to happen here to be our representatives and to, actually change the powers that be, if that's possible.
Yes, change the whole paradigm. I think a lot of people are, as you say, the pandemic has enabled us to question a lot of what we used to call normal. And we're hoping that we don't go back to that old normal again. Well, I mean, we all want to continue to
Some
eat.
good, some bad, yeah.
Yeah, right.
I'd like to be with my family at Christmas in my living room, but that didn't happen this year.
No. Well, let's I know we've got an audience out there that has questions for you. And I also just want to check in with them. I want to use that raise hand feature on the bottom of your screen there and ask you how many of you had heard before that that the currency is what is called a fiat currency. It's just created out of thin air, really, and trust that that money is created out of bank loans. How many of you, raise your hand if you've heard of that before? Yeah. Where am I going to see that, Elaine? Do you know?
It looks like at least 15 people have raised their hand so far.
So at least 15 people have heard that. So, but we have a number of people here, don't we? We had like 70 people registered to come tonight.
We have about 45.
45 who came. Okay. Well, that's a sizable chunk. I want to also ask you, how many of you have loans at the bank? Student loans, mortgages, maybe home equity loan, what they used to call second mortgages. How many of those do you see?
It looks like almost the same number have raised their hand so far. For the attendees, if you don't know where to go to raise your hand, it's down at the bottom of your Zoom panel. There may be 3 dots you can click on to say more to find where you can raise and lower your hand. It looks like about 16 people so far have raised their hand to say they have loans at banks.
Only 16 people, really? Well, I want to congratulate those 16 people for helping to supply the nation with money. Thank you for your contribution. Unfortunately, as Mary touched on, the bank doesn't create the interest that can as much as double what you need to pay the bank back. And that's why money sometimes, most often, almost always, seems to be too little. There's not quite enough. It's kind of an artificial scarcity that I think what Mary is talking about might help address. Not that there isn't a good function for loans and for, getting a return on that loan, but I thought we'd have 100% people with loans of some kind. I'm surprised. Maybe we just have shy people who don't want to talk about it. That's possible, Money is kind of a shameful subject too. I don't know if any of you have noticed that. Ebony and Ellen in particular, do you think that our dollars, those dollar bills that we all use to buy groceries, do you think that are using what are really Federal Reserve notes? If you look at the fine print at the top of the bill, it says Federal Reserve note. Do you think that that makes your work with public banking or with the self-help credit union, which any less valuable?
Ellen.
Sorry, I thought she asked you first. Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was just looking at the chat.
Oh, you were? What I'm asking is the fact that the self-help credit union, by the way, I learned in getting ready for this, this conversation that of all the 9 categories of banks that there are out there, credit unions are the only ones that are incorporated as nonprofits. I didn't know that. That's kind of important to know. Do you think that using Federal Reserve notes, the dollar bills that we all buy our groceries with, using those fiat dollars created out of bank credit, does it make the work that public banks do or that the self-help credit union does less valuable?
I think if we could redesign the whole system, I would set them up as treasury notes, you know, or U.S. notes, or, you know, what the American colonists had, issued by the government directly. The problem with the central bank issued notes is that the central banks are an international system that are up to their own no good, as far as I can. I mean, of course, on the surface,
yeah,
on the surface, they're up to good, but we have no control. They're not democratic. We do not get to vote on what the Bank for International Settlements and the World Bank and the IMF. We have no democratic say in what they are up to. And the central banks work together, and they pride themselves on being independent of the government. I know the argument is that if the government issued the money directly, the politicians would, you know, issue too much, and it would be inflationary, and there would be no check on what they did. And I mean, there's something to that too. But if you could have a central bank that was a public institution that was separate, just like we have a court system that's separate from the administration, it's separate from Congress and separate from the banking system, we could have a public system that was independent but had a mandate to serve the public rather than a mandate to serve Wall Street, which is effectively what they do.
Mm-hmm. But we're stuck with these green bills for now. Now. So is the public banking is going to be using those bills and is still going to be doing some good stuff, right? I mean,
you're advancing credit, and that is the national currency, and it's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, et cetera. Some people say it's fiat, not backed by anything, but it actually is backed by goods and services, or ideally it's backed by goods and services. So the original system was, when the fiat notes, the paper script, was first issued by the governor of Massachusetts in 1691, he had a little war going on, and border war, I guess, with Canada or something. And maybe, well, anyway, a little war going on, and he didn't have any money to pay the soldiers. So he issued these paper scripts, little paper receipts that basically were saying, we, the community, acknowledge that you all have done service for the community, and we'll give you credit for whatever you need of that value. And that's what those slips are supposed to be. That they're in an ideal system, or you have these trading clubs that are online, and that's literally what they are. In other words, you sell some product into the system and you get X amount, and you can use that too. But of course, now we have this whole financialized system where much of what the loans are used for is not anything productive. It's to allow big investors to buy up small investors, or to do all the nefarious.
Now you're talking about Wall Street again, and what my question was, is this fiat currency that we're now using it, because it is the what is the word for the legal script? It's the
Legal tender.
Legal tender. Thank you. It is the legal tender. It's what we must use to pay our taxes and pay off our loans. So even though it's what it is, and is public banking going to do good with it? And does the self-help credit union to do good things with it? That's my question.
If I understand your question, I think that I don't think it directly affects us. I think that we still have a purpose to serve. And even though we have the federal notes and the dollars, there are still people who don't have the funds that they need in order to purchase a home. It doesn't matter how many dollars you have. I'd also like to point out, interestingly enough, when COVID happened, I remember my mom, she called my brother and I, and she was like, because we both live in separate states. She was like, y'all need to get money out of the bank, get you a ton of cash, because we don't know what's going to happen. They're taking toilet paper off the shelves. Just make sure you have enough so that you'll be okay. What we did not anticipate was there being a cash and a coin shortage. And that happened across the country. And I think that, to me, that's also kind of indicative of the direction that we're moving as a country. And I do think that it is, I think the notes are important, but I don't think that it necessarily affects the work we're doing. Because in reality, you know, that, I guess if you want to call it fiat, it's the direction we're moving in as a country.
Yeah, I could envision a system where every community had its own digital currency issued by its own public bank, but legally we can't pull that off now. So people ask me about that. You know, it's always out there, the idea of community currencies and digital community currencies, but setting the system up is trickier. And something like Bitcoin is so, it's just not efficient. It's energy intensive. It's, is it $5 trillion, I think, are traded daily of dollars, US dollars. And if you did that much trade in Bitcoin, it would be so slow and so expensive. So it's not really a trading currency. It's really a speculative investment. And for that, you know, if people want to speculate,
There's lots of ways to do it. Yeah.
It's bad, but it's not going to work for a national currency. For a national currency, you really need some issued by the nation, or at least issued by the nation's central bank.
Well, I want to, we've had a great conversation, some really wonderful insights that you've shared with us, and all of you. And I want to make sure that the audience has an opportunity to ask questions too, although we're almost out of time. We'll probably have room for one or two, but I confess I don't see any questions on the Q&A. Is that right, Carmen?
There have actually been quite a number of questions shared in the chat.
Oh, in the chat. I haven't been looking at that. I can't chat and do webinar at the same time.
I would be glad to read a couple of the questions that have come in.
Okay. I think we have time for maybe 2 short ones.
All right. So I see one here from Laurel asking, Ebony, is your credit union a nonprofit? Interest put back into the credit union for the benefit of its customers?
We are a nonprofit. We are member owned. And yes, all of our work goes to support the communities that we're in. So we're in 8 states and it goes directly into those communities.
Mm-hmm. And Karen Osborne asks all of the panelists, so I'm not sure who would like to take this one, but Karen asks, what do you all think of entities like As You Sow that help investors invest their values? They have suggestions like fossil-free funds and gender equity funds.
I'm a huge fan of the impact investing space and mutual funds. There are many mutual funds that have been in existence for a long time, but there are also many that are new that focus on specific areas. I currently serve on a board called USCIF, and USCIF is one of a large organization that is a membership organization for these entities. We have a spreadsheet or chart that kind of shows a listing of various mutual funds, depending on what causes are important to you. I'm happy to provide a link in the chat so folks can check out various investment options depending on what your values are. But I do think that investing with your values is very, very important. And it's a form of activism.
Interesting.
Yes. Ellen, Lucille asks, why generate public credit when we can generate public money instead?
Well, I think public money is public credit. That's the point, that money is credit. Our money is created. Well, it's complicated and I probably don't have time to go into it, but the bank actually writes it on one side of its books as a deposit to the borrower, and which is a liability to the bank because it will have to cover that money when the check goes out into another bank. And then it's written on the other side of the books as an asset to the bank because you're going to pay that back over time with interest, of course. And so the books balance. But really what it is, it's just an advance of credit. That's what all of our money is. Or picture a community currency where currency is created, like let's say you're in a small community currency and you say, you give somebody $5 worth of credit to wash your car. So you're advancing credit and they wash the car and they get the credits and then you have to pay back the credits. I mean, that's what money is. It's a give and take, it's a flow. It's not gold. In fact, if you trace, Michael Hudson has traced the origins of money back 5,000 years. And originally it was set up as a banking or a loan system, there wasn't gold in the system then. It was really just a trade system of keeping track of who owed what to whom. And there was interest involved because the temple then was the landowner, or the king was the landowner, and you were supposed to pay your tithe every year. And if you had a bad crop year, you could pay some interest and then pay the tithe the next year. So that's where interest came in originally. But that is our original money system. Some people think it originated with gold, but that's not actually true. Gold came in later. Gold coins came in later.
Well, I think we're getting close to being out of time. And I just want to ask our audience again, if any of you learned anything from this conversation. Did you get some information that you are curious about? Maybe raise some questions that you'll need to read up on now that you've learned a little bit about it? Do we see it? Is it the same 15 people, I wonder? Elaine, can you tell me?
It looks like 4 have raised their hand so far. Has anyone else learned something tonight?
Vicki, if there's time, I would like to give my little pitch for the Alliance for Just Money.
Sure.
We're up to 15 already. More people are raising their hands.
Oh, good. Go ahead, Mary, please.
Thank you. So this question about is it credit or is it money? And Ellen is explaining that credit is money and money is credit. That's kind of in dispute because Ellen, you appreciate the colonial script, the Pennsylvania script. And you wouldn't say that that's credit. It was where they decided to print up X number of dollars. And yes, they lent it so that it would recirculate and the government would get some income to pay their expenses, but it wasn't lent into service. It was mandated into service, if I'm not mistaken. And that's what the Alliance for Just Money is going for now. But would you want to say anything about that, Ellen?
Well, technically it was an advance against future taxes. The problem was that it was a lot easier to print the money and spend it than to call it back in taxes. And that's why the northern colonies tended to to devalue their currencies, like they printed too much. But in Pennsylvania, they came up with this clever system where they printed printed paper script and lent it to the farmers, and then it would come back to the government. So that was a sustainable system. It goes out, it comes back in the form of products. Products are sold, and then the money comes back to the government. And then the government could, of course, issue some extra, and that would cover the interest or whatever was needed. I agree. The government, ideally right now, I think we should be issuing some $1 trillion coins, paying off a lot of, putting it in our bank account. That's what could be done.
So stable, permanent money, not this money that, you lend it, you borrow it, it gets paid back and relent, and there's always interest. What we want is a permanent, stable money that will recirculate. that the government can lend, that the government can take back as taxes, but something permanent and stable that's not so easy to turn into speculation in gunpoint mines, for example. So that is what the Alliance for Just Money is working for. And as I said before, it's a plan that has been historically proven in several occasions. And I just want to say the 3 points to the plan and invite you all to look at the Alliance for Just Money website. There's excellent bibliographies there, and we hold coffee houses online with a speaker and a conversation every month. But the 3-point plan, which is incorporated in Dennis Kucinich's 2011 NEED Act, is kind of the base that we stand on for our work. And we do consider ourselves close allies of public banking. The fact that public is at the heart of it is an important feature. But our 3-point plan is that Congress will create all US money. We consider that there can be such a thing as money that is not debt. And that's a serious argument for somebody to have, maybe not me. Congress will create all US money in the amounts necessary to maintain stable purchasing power. That's the mandate. And it's debt-free public money going into circulation so that debts can begin to be paid. Several people here know about how the debt has gone so far beyond the GDP. What is it like? If you count up household, business, and government debt, it's like 4 or 5 times the GDP. It's like impossible to think about ever paying it. So the interest keeps compounding and we keep feeling more pressure and burden. So our idea is to have some stable money with which one can begin to pay. And the second point of it is that the banks will stop creating and allocating new money. Congress will allocate the new money for the good of the commons rather than banks allocating new money to increase their power. And the third thing is that the 12 regional banks of the Federal Reserve will be bought out, and the member banks' shares will be reimbursed with the new US money. I just wanted to get that in for everybody to have a chance to think about for a minute and to invite you all to look at the Alliance for Just Money website.
Good idea. Good idea. I encourage you all to visit Public Banking Institute's website and the Self-Help Credit Union's website and all of them, and take a look at their work as well. All of these panelists' work as well in the resources for further learning. We've got some wonderful articles and videos and books that you can take a look at. We are out of time, I'm afraid. I am not able to see how many hands are raised at this point, but I'm pretty sure. Carmen, I'm seeing your hand up. Is there something that I need to pay attention to? Ah, the slide here. We're at this place. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to our presenters tonight, all of you. I think we've been talking about big bubbles and the differences that real investments in our communities, the difference that can make. Ebony Perkins, Ellen Brown, Mary Sanderson, and in absentia, Adrienne Masanari too. Take a look at her work as well. Thank you everyone so very, very much. Keep in touch with us, will you? Look ahead for another Zoom of our own on May 24th. We're going to be talking about restoring Mother Earth and a feminist Green New Deal, which might involve some more currency questions. I think they're there. Your donation in any amount, any time, is going to help us grow resources for women's economic empowerment. We're not rich, maybe, but we are so many, as Ellen has said. Write us, share with us, fill out your evaluation if you would, and connect with AEOO, an economy of our own. Lots of ways to do it. We've got a newsletter. We've got contact information on our website. There it is, the organization's website. And there's that donate button if you can in any amount. It helps.
with that, I think I'm going to have to say good night. I haven't looked at the chat. Is there anything I'm missing?
It looks like, Ricky, in the chat, we are seeing some wonderful comments in thanks and gratitude.
Well, I join them in that gratitude so very, very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for everyone who attended. It's wonderful to see you here. And we've got to keep on talking. Women need to keep on talking about this sore subject of money. All right. It's ours.
Yeah.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.